Okay, we are calling to order public meeting number 229 on November 21st, 10 o'clock a.m. at the Gaming Commission office on Federal Street. We will start out, as always, with the minutes. Commissioner McDonald.
Yes, I move that we approve the minutes of the November 9th, 2017 public meeting, subject to corrections for typographical errors and for other non-material matters.
Second. Any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to point out that around the 11:47, well, maybe the 11:12 mark in the minutes, it's one of those things that I think the minutes really sort of summarize what took place when. And it's one of those things that, in my opinion, the vote doesn't quite capture the conclusion that we arrived at during that time, and that is that that the MGC had indeed the authority to set the race dates, the number of race days, which was different from what Mr. McHugh was arguing, and that we also concluded that the three statutory race dates years had been met, none of which is in the summary or the vote. We effectively, the vote reflects what the vote, the minutes reflect what the vote did, in my opinion, but there was these two other conclusions that are not reflected.
It's in this, it's sort of in the sentence under the 12 o'clock where it says, that Catherine Blue says the legislature understands there may be a need to adjust the number of race days. It's kind of implied, but it's not clear. So it'd be easy, maybe Shara, to make that a little clearer in the redraft.
We can beef up the minutes on that section.
And I'm sure two sentences can do the point that I try to make, which was that those two.
And there was the point that it was what the thought that carried the day was that there be a compromise between the two proposals, and that's not mentioned there either. So
Well, it's ultimately reflected in the vote. It was a
vote,
compromise,
right, yeah.
but not in the discussion.
Right.
And on that point, and I should have picked this up because I think I was the one who pressed Dr. Lightbaum on the point, is that her recommendation was the 110 days, so that ought to be
That was a
added.
fairly seminal moment. That's a good point.
We can add both of those.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
So amended.
All in favor of the motion as amended?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it 4-0. Commissioner Cameron is not in attendance. Okay, we are then on to Mr. Bedrosian, I believe.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Morning.
So I have two items today. The second item is CFAO Lennon has come out of a sick bed to give the interim
great.
budget. Yes, we've kept him separated. We're trying to
Quarantine.
isolate him also from staff, but he's feeling better and he managed to come in today, so we appreciate that. Before we get to Mr. Lennon, I did want to tell you that this week is the last week of racing at Plainridge Park Casino. The last day of the season will be Friday for 125 days. Our HR staff is actually down at PPC today doing exit interviews with the seasonal staff, which we find valuable in preparing for next season. So thank you to Director Lightbaum, the leadership. We got 125 days in, and we'll be looking forward to, as you discussed, about the 110 days next season. So congratulations to them.
Great.
So with that, I will turn it over to CFAO Lennon for the report on the mid-year budget.
Thank you, Executive Director Bedrosian, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'd just like to endorse Dayquil and NyQuil. They're great products for anyone who needs them. But I am joined here today by Agnes and Bruce Band, and we're here to present to you the anticipated FY18 budget increase to support the operational costs of opening the MGM facility in Springfield. Just for a little background, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission approved an FY18 budget for the Gaming Control Fund of $29.15 million, It required an assessment of $24.45 million on licensees. A balance forward of FY17 revenue and first quarter activity has resulted in the FY18 budget decreasing by $24,600 and the assessment on licensees decreasing by $872,000 from $24.45 million to $23.58 million. When the commission approved the FY18 initial budget, it was with the knowledge that MGC operational costs associated with the startup of MGM Springfield were not included. We explained in the June 2017 public meetings the reason for not including the startup cost was due to the fact that it was still at least 16 months from the opening of the facility, and the timetable was approximate and delays could result in the MGC budgeting and assessing for costs not associated with FY18. At this point, MGM continues to believe they will meet its opening date. Therefore, as promised in June, we're presenting to you our additional anticipated needs in FY18 to be ready to open the MGM facility in September of 2018. The same information was presented to our licensees and discussed at a meeting on November 15th in our office. The chart on page 2 of the memorandum breaks the anticipated $570,000 in additional costs out by object class and code. The memo breaks it out further by division. The majority of the costs are for 14 FTs, 1 each in human resources and finance and administration, 11 in the IEB, all gaming agent or supervising gaming agents, and 1 additional license coordinator. The next biggest area is contracted employees, of which we are asking for 4, 3 civilian contracted investigators to supplement the MSP efforts, and 1 licensing representative in Springfield, which in the memo I've listed as starting in March of 2017, which someone pointed out to me is incorrect and should read March of 2018. There are another $64,000 of costs for GameSense responsible gaming outreach efforts prior to the opening, and then some additional operational costs of circuits and temp help. Page 3 of the memo lays out the regulatory authority the commission has to increase its budget during the fiscal year, as well as what the increase would look like to licensees if this were ultimately approved in regards to their assessment. We're asking to have this plan posted for public comment and bring this back to you for further discussion or a vote at the first public meeting in December. If you have any questions on any of the information in the memo, we're open to field them now.
Comments?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better. Couple of quick questions. You break out contract employees versus temporary help. Why not just push those together, or is there different responsibilities of the 2 groups that you're hiring from?
So contract employees function more like a regular employee, but they have a time-specific start and end date. It's a whole separate procurement and posting process. Temp help, we go to a temp help agency, which there are 3 on the statewide contract, and ask for the specific people, where with the contracted employee, you actually hire like it's a person. It's just it has a start and end time on it. It's not a regular FT that continues until we break service with them.
Different responsibilities for both groups?
There are different responsibilities for both groups on the licensing side. If you recall, during the first opening where we were flooded with Plainville, the temp people came in and literally just sifted through paperwork and helped out in a capacity that didn't need a lot of hands-on work, and they were more just clerical type help, where with the contracted employee, the person out in Springfield that we're looking at, they would be the face of the MGC. There would be a higher position that would have to do some of the filtering through paperwork.
Okay. When you get down to the schedule for IEB team and hires, and maybe Bruce, you can help answer this question. So you're going to have 4 experienced agents, hopefully we bring on February 2018, and then you talk about 7 supervisor gaming agents, so I'm assuming those would be gaming agents that are going to train?
And yes, and backfill for people that have moved to other positions.
Okay.
But for the 4 experience, we're down 2 people now, one with Ryan leaving our agency and with Sterl being promoted. It leaves us 2 short. Soon we will have to send some people out to MGM to start doing some of the inspections. So I need to backfill with some people that we don't necessarily have to give extensive training to.
Right.
In order to staff it. And we'll be starting training of the new agents about mid-May, and that will take some more of our staff as trainers to do that. So.
Okay.
So do the 4 backfill 2 and add 2, or add 4?
Well, we're just want to bring it back up to like 12, and, you know, to have that staffed, and that way we'd have a full complement, and we're actually kind of getting beaten up a little bit now with overtime, which we're trying to avoid. Our staff we frozen vacation for July, August, beginning of September. And so people are trying to take their time now, which, you know, compounds the issue.
Right. But it's an incremental of 4.
It's an incremental of 4. So if you look at it, even with the backfills that we're talking about, those are already budgeted.
Yep.
So we're down right now, which is why Bruce alluded to the fact that we're using some overtime.
Yep.
But these would be 4 additional positions.
I did have a question on the timing on that, and sounds conservative in my view, which is great. There's some work to do up front, and including some of these backfilling that you talk about. There's a January start for the field manager, and then 4 senior supervising agents in February. Why do we feel the need to start
They will
a few
start-
months?
yeah.
A few months.
They will
before?
actually be out at MGM mid-January. They'll be working with MGM staff on their submissions and things like that, starting March 1st. The cameras start going online and the slots going on the floor. The way we're planning to do the slots is that we will accompany MGM, so when they do their inspection, we'll do our inspection to save time, but that's going to make me have somebody there with them, you know, for the whole day that they work. So,
And we also anticipate having some of the other senior supervisors there, too.
yes, yes.
So are we really thinking about 6 or 7 people at, you know,
Yes,
in Springfield since February?
It will be needed to get them open in a timely fashion and to work with the property on any questions. We've already started doing some inspections, like the steel in the walls, you know, the cage, money areas, and those kind of inspections have already started, so.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and that timetable is consistent with what our CMS team as well as our IT team is looking at to get out there and start doing some of the turnover of the floor and the inspection. So we've already been trained, I know the IT team has, as well as the CMS team, on OSHA requirements to be out on the property starting in January. So it's not an unreasonable ask, I think, that what Bruce is looking for.
So Bruce, the slots are actually, the machines are going to be installed beginning to be installed as early
They'll
as March?
Begin in due zones in March. There's a lot of wiring that's involved with that. You know, you got to test the machine to make sure it's communicating with everything. So it's a timely process to get the floor all laid out. Once you lay it out, certain machines don't look as good in certain spots, so it means relocating it and just keeping up with all that.
And your people, at that time of the process, do what? They actually test the machines?
Yeah, they will be working in conjunction with the NOC to verify the chips and then do build tests on the machine and, you know, that aspect of it.
One just quick question. I'm glad to see that we're responding to the availability of somebody who wants to register for the voluntary self-exclusion list. You have the Game Sense person coming on in January. Are they going to physically, I mean, they're going to be in our space, but is that space, because of ongoing construction, going to be readily accessible by a patron or a person who wants to walk up? Or are we thinking about
I don't know where they're
housing that
planning
person in
on
the
putting them,
UMass
but
space?
in the building themselves, they would not be allowed to go in because it's still under construction.
Right. I mean, we still have rent on the UMass space. It may make sense
Right, we
to
could always use that spot.
sit
It's,
them there.
yeah, that spot's highly underutilized at this point. So we would work out whatever they'd.
Some of these, all of these items in general strike me as a little conservative, which is fine for budgeting purposes. But I know that as we post for positions and we have, some of them are promotions, so there could be very easy to transfer or transition. Others are new hires, and that could take more than sometimes anticipated in terms of background checks and onboarding and all that. So I'm generally, okay with some of these for budgetary purposes. I do think that we may be, in general, a little bit conservative on the start dates, but I know this changes as you need to.
Yeah, I agree, Commissioner Zuniga, that the best laid plans aren't always what actually happens in terms of hiring process. But obviously, we need to post this, get comments, and come back to the commission for final thoughts or approval. But we will be conservative with the thought process that operationally, what often happens is we say January, that ends up being February or even in March or something like that.
Or you intend to bring 4, and then you end up bringing 3 because somebody drops off, and then that person
Whatever.
comes in a little later.
Exactly.
And we'll have to manage all of that. I do think, and maybe because I'm a little bit more familiar with that, but the information technology and finance administration and human resources, some of it we're already seeing that need, and there's a brand new process, all table game revenue, and we had identified that, I believe, earlier as something that we needed to reinforce. So I'm glad that that's all.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Zuniga's instinct to want to scrub the numbers and look really hard at it is a really good instinct, and we'll need to continue to do that. But I also think the notion of at the launch erring on the side of timing is of extra time is perfectly appropriate, and I think you've concluded the same thing. There's you can cover up a lot of problems, but not having the people there yet is an issue. So I think it makes sense for sure, because things never go like they want. So I both agree with the need to really keep a sharp eye out, but also agree that now's the time to be cautious. Any other comments on the budget? So the process now,
Would be that we would post it for
Right,
comment
right.
and then come back to the commission.
right, so it'll be available for public comment for the next couple of weeks, and we'll bring it up again in 2 weeks at our next meeting.
I'll make one final comment, which I think is really a great way to go with which Commissioner Stebbins was also asking about our mix of civil, temporary, and contract workforce to deal with the trough that with the peak, I guess, with the workload that's going to come for some period of time. I think it's very appropriate. So that's a great.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lennon. You
Thank
are
you.
excused.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jump back in bed.
Feel better?
Thank you, commissioners. That is all I have.
Okay, next up is item number 4, General Counsel Blue.
So Commissioners, we have for you today a number of regulations, all of which, except for B, you've seen before, and B is fairly simple, so we'll go one by one. The first item, 4A, what you have before you is only the small business impact statement. We've brought to you the 205 CMR 138.33 before, that's on the unsecured wagers. Today, we're just asking for your approval of the small business impact statement so we can start the formal process and then take this through to promulgation.
Comments or?
Mr. Chair, I move the commission approve the small business impact statement amendments to 205 CMR 137.02 is included in the packet, and authorize the staff to take the steps necessary to begin the regulation promulgation process.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you. Item 4B arose out of some questions that we got, and it's an attempt to clarify our regulation. When certain people with the gaming schools looked at our regulation, they were concerned that you had to take responsible gaming training for 90 minutes with each separate course you took on gaming, which means you could take it up to 6 times, and we realized that was not our intent. So this is a clarification of that regulation that basically says you only have to take the one 90-minute course, no matter how many courses you take in the gaming school. And so we want to just get this through so the gaming schools will have it and they can adjust their curriculums appropriately. So today we have before you the small business impact statement and the amended regulation, and we're asking for your approval to start the promulgation process for that.
Yeah, this came out of, as the community colleges were putting the estimates together, it was a rather surprising amount of money to complete this training when we went back. It's helpful just to kind of make this distinction, not only for, the community colleges, but, if some private operator decides to come along and get licensed, they'll understand the requirements.
I think it's great to clarify whenever we need to. I don't know how anybody read the way that it previously read, how anybody read that it applied to every single time, unless it was self-serving, of course. But I'm all for this clarification.
I move that the commission approve the small business impact statement for the amendments to 205 CMR 138.28, 138.33, 138.68, and 140.02, as included in the packet, and authorize the staff to take the steps necessary to begin the regulation promulgation process.
Further discussion?
I think,
Do we have our motions?
well, I think that,
Not
I think
aligned.
you,
I think
you
my
did.
motion was for this one,
Okay,
even
so,
though it was laid out as 4A. And I think the motion Commissioner McDonald gave us was
Was
for the
for 4A.
previous rate. I mean,
let's
we're
see.
taking care of it, we're just maybe doing
That's-
it in a different order.
I agree with you, Commissioner Stebbins, you are correct. So, why don't, 4A, I think on your documents is really what's supposed to be 4B. So why don't we do 4B at the moment, and then we can go back and do 4A appropriately? So if you would,
4B.
if you would use the motion for 4B, Commissioner McDonald, I think that would work. That's for 13702,
Which is
As to
4A,
13702.
yes.
which is the 4A page.
But that's the language that Commissioner Stebbins,
No, what I have on 4A is for the small business impact statement and amendments to 205 CMR 13702.
Right.
That's for the responsible gaming regulation.
I see, okay. Accordingly, I move that the commission approve the small business impact statement amendments to 205 CMR 137.02 as included in the packet, and authorize the staff to take the steps necessary to begin the regulation promulgation process.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And then Commissioner Stebbins, if you would
Sure.
move what
So
was 4B.
this will be
Be 4A now?
revision of the first.
Revision of the first motion, yes.
first motion.
Sorry
It'll
about that.
replace it.
I move that the commission approve the small business impact statement for the amendments to 205 CMR 138.28, 138.33, 138.68, and 140.02 is included in the packet, and authorize the staff to take the steps necessary to begin the regulation promulgation process.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And then finally, 4C, these are the racing medication regulations. You first saw them probably about 6 months ago and passed them on an emergency basis. They have gone through the promulgation process. They have been with the legislature for the required 60 days that they have to be there. So now we're just asking you to approve that draft and approve the amended small business impact statement, and we'll finalize these regulations. The racing meets have operated under these for this entire season. They seem to have worked well. We haven't seen any particular uptick in hearings. I can't speak for the judges' rulings, but in terms of appeals, we haven't seen any more than the normal number of appeals. So, and these are the RCI regulations, so we're coming into conformance with the national standards.
I chatted about this with Council Blue and Deputy General Counsel Grossman earlier. We've kind of followed the ARCI standards. I think it helps provide some uniformity for the industry across jurisdictions. But as I shared with them, what kind of jumped out at me in the small business impact statement is reduction of penalties for multiple medication violation, which to me seems kind of counterintuitive, but, if it's consistent with the RCI model that other jurisdictions are adopting, I'm willing to approve it, but I want to gain some experience under this and see how we do, because, again, reducing penalties for being caught the second or third or fourth time just seemed a little counterintuitive, but I'm willing to work with staff and kind of watch it and see how penalties are imposed when we find violations in Massachusetts.
And I think if it's helpful to the commission, I think Dr. Lightbaum had a chance to talk with Commissioner Stebbins, and I asked her to send me an email so I could understand what the reason was for the change. And as she described to me, the decision to lower the points was made because they could add up quicker than people had anticipated, and it put trainers with a large number of horses at a disadvantage. And that, to some degree, makes sense to me. If the more horses you have, the more potential you have for a violation. And that the people at RCI, the trainers and the judges, and in fact our own judges, are comfortable with this. But I also agree with Commissioner Stebbins that we need to take a look at it and see how it works in our jurisdiction. And we always have the ability to differ from the RCI regulations if we think that's appropriate. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll look at it from this season. We'll look at it again for the next meet and see how it works.
Yeah, I think we should keep an eye on it, but, I think that repeat offenses on banned substances would certainly be counterintuitive. But these substances are therapeutic, and it's about dosages which is why, in conjunction with the number of horses, that point that you make is my suspicion why RCI is going the direction they're going. But it's great to keep an eye.
I mean, you might want to make a note somewhere, Commissioner Stebbins, because probably it would be after next year's meet, we would then have the data to go back and take a hard look. Would that be compatible
Sure.
with your thing? So
Yeah, I mean, there's also a little bit more discretion built in for our stewards, et cetera. So just to kind of follow the progress as to how we're implementing it,
but we have a lot going on, and I don't want to forget,
No.
a year from now. So we put in the record, and Alex puts on her calendar, and you put on your calendar that at this time next year, we do some formal analysis, which would be really interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay. Further discussion?
So I
Wait,
think
did we have a motion?
No, we
didn't
need
have
a motion. It'd be item 4C on your papers.
I move that the commission approve the amended small business impact statement and final version of 205 CMR 3.00 racing medication regulations, and the amended small business impact statement and final version of 205 CMR 4.00 racing medication regulations as included in the packet, and authorize the staff to take all steps necessary to file the regulation with the Secretary of the Commonwealth and complete the regulation promulgation process.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, that's all we have.
Okay, and we are on to Director Vanderlyn. Et al.
Do they need time to transition?
You want to take a break and
Give me time to set up, or?
all right, well, let's take a quick 5, and we'll come back. Okay, we are reconvening public meeting 229 at about 10:35, and we are going to Director Vanderlinden.
Okay, good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
I'm going to go down the line here, and I'm going to introduce our research team from the Cambridge Health Alliance. To my immediate right, we have Dr. Debbie LaPlante. She is the Director of Research and Academic Affairs at the Cambridge Health Alliance, as well as Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Next to Debbie, we have Dr. Matt Tom, who is a research data analyst with the Cambridge Health Alliance. And then Pradeep Singh, Dr. Pradeep Singh, also a data analyst with the Cambridge Health Alliance, and Dr. Tim Edson, data analyst with the Cambridge Health Alliance. So thank you all for joining us here today.
Never had so many PhDs in this building. The level of intellect just went up about 100% in this place.
I wanted to just give you a little taste of background about where we are and where things stand before I turn it over to to Debbie and Matt to go over the evaluation. So a key educational objective of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission Responsible Gaming Framework is to provide accurate and balanced information to enable informed choices to be made about gambling activities. To support this objective, Strategy 2 of the framework identifies measures including the development and implementation of play management tools. Such tools are incorporated into electronic gaming machines, slot machines, to enable players to more easily track their play, manage their gaming decisions, and to obtain real-time individualized feedback. In December 2014, the Commission voted to adopt a play management system, what we call now Play My Way, in cooperation with Plainridge Park Casino. Because the body of research supporting the effectiveness of these tools was limited and even inconclusive, the Commission specified that implementation would be on a test basis and that determination of whether this program continues and extended to Category 1 casinos would be informed in part by the findings of an evaluation. So following 18 months of development with Scientific Games and Plainridge Park Casino, on June 9, 2016, Play My Way was launched at Plainridge Park Casino as a benefit to player card members. Patrons have the opportunity to enroll in the program at any slot machine, GameSense kiosk, or with a GameSense advisor at the GameSense Information Center inside of the casino. Play My Way prompts cardholders to voluntarily choose daily, weekly, and/or monthly budget to track their spending at Plainridge Park Casino. Once enrolled, patrons receive automatic notifications as they approach 50 and 75% of their spent budget. Players also receive notifications when they reach 100% of their budget, and then if they choose to continue to play, they'll receive notifications at 25% intervals. The program is strictly voluntary, and players can unenroll, adjust their budgets, or adjust their budgets or enroll at any time from any slot machine or electronic gaming device or at the kiosk at the GameSense Information Center. Today, our research team from the Cambridge Health Alliance Division on Addiction will present findings from the preliminary study of patrons' use of Play My Way during the period of June 2016 through January 2017. Before I turn it over to Debbie and Matt, I would just really want to call out a few people here. Plainridge Park Casino has been an incredible partner in launching this program. This is a new program. It hasn't been done in the United States. And Plainridge Park Casino, Penn National Gaming, were willing partners to introduce this type of responsible gaming tool to their floor. They were instrumental in the development, they were instrumental in the launch, and in the ongoing operation of this program. I'd like to call out Scientific Games as well. They are the developers of this specific tool. It runs on the casino management system of Plainridge Park Casino. It's a rather complex explanation, but Scientific Games has been key in the development, not ongoing upgrades and updates to the system. The Cambridge Health Alliance, and all the twists and turns of developing this program, they've been responsive in dealing with data issues, changes in the scope of what we were doing, to have the report today and the ongoing evaluation. And then finally, and certainly not least of all, is our GameSense advisors, the GameSense program, and the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling. I don't believe it's accurately reflected in here, or we can possibly quite capture it, but the importance of the GameSense program overall and how Play My Way fits within that overall strategy is key. I think that we have a lot to thank them for, their support and their enthusiasm about this specific program. So,
Mark, before you go on, I would like to just expand on that a little bit, because I think it's an important message. one of the principles, on the primary principles of the so-called Reno model, which is kind of the basic framework that people have used as an underpinning of the conceptual framework of responsible gaming strategies, is that collaboration among all the industry partners is required to be constructive in going forward. That's easier said than done. And in this instance, this thing we call Play My Way, we call it a play management system, is also referred to and previously referred to as pre-commitment system. Pre-commitment, having either requiring or offering the opportunity of players to limit their play, it has been a tremendously controversial strategy within the industry, where all of our licensees were initially highly predisposed against trying it any further. Even Cambridge Health Alliance's principals have been pretty strong critics of previous pre-commitment strategies. But everybody, and we had the authority to make this be a trial if we wanted to, but we didn't want to just go out and order it. We wanted it to do it in collaboration with our licensees, if that were possible. And to their great credit, they all suspended disbelief, said, yeah, let's give it a shot. And as you said, Penn National, who is our test site, has been an extraordinary collaborative partner, and our other licensees have been supportive as well, to the point where some of them are considering the possibility of adopting some such system themselves. And Cambridge Health Alliance has put their shoulder to the wheel and helped us design it and now help us evaluate it. And as you say, this couldn't have happened as successfully without everybody's support. But it's a very powerful reinforcement of the fact that trying to figure out how to get collaboration. If you disagree, you end up disagreeing. But if you can get collaboration, it makes life much easier. In this case, it required some serious suspension of disbelief or suspension of skepticism on the part of a number of our partners to go forward. So it's a credit to you because you kind of led this fight, but it's also a really tremendous credit to them. And I think the licensees in particular deserve real serious recognition for being willing to participate in this with us.
That's well said.
Great. Okay, Debbie, I think you want to lead the show now.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Commissioners, for having us here today. As Mark said, my name is Debbie LaPlante, and I'll be sharing an overview of our study of Play My Way. My colleagues Matt Tom, Pradeep Singh, and Tim Edson are here with me today and available to help answer any in-depth questions that you might have about these findings. So for the purposes of full disclosure, I want to recognize that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission provided the funding for this study. And I also wanted to recognize the other current sponsors of the division's research. I also want to acknowledge Division on Addiction colleagues who've supported this work and other related work. We're grateful for their support. And I will start today by providing a little bit of background information for this study. So now, although all of you are well-versed about the gambling-related changes that have happened in Massachusetts, for new listeners, I'll do a quick recap that during 2011, Massachusetts legalized gambling expansion. Active licenses include the Plainridge Park Casino, Wynn Boston Harbor, MGM Springfield, though other developments are possible. Part of this legislation included public health and responsible gambling requirements. To start, the Gaming Commission is fulfilling those requirements through 3 programs: the Game Sense program, voluntary self-exclusion, and Play My Way. The 2011 legislation also requires an annual research program to monitor gambling in Massachusetts. Some projects under this requirement include the Sigma and Magic studies, research on special populations such as veterans and ethnic minorities, public safety research, and evaluation studies of the responsible gambling programs and activities. This presentation concerns the evaluation of Play My Way at Plainridge Park Casino, which is a pre-commitment or play management budget system. Some people might not be familiar with the term pre-commitment. Simply put, pre-commitment refers to a system that enables gamblers to set money and time limits expenditure prior to the commencement of a session of play. There are a number of varieties of such systems that might include stop losses or stop wins, or focus on time limits. Systems can take a hard stop approach, which means that the system itself prevents a user from further gambling once a limit is reached, or a soft stop approach, which means that the system leaves the final decision about whether to keep gambling or not to the gambler. Scientific Games, as Mark mentioned, developed the system that is in use in Plainridge Park Casino. They've used a variation of this system in other jurisdictions, including Australia. When Play My Way launched at Plainridge Park Casino, Derek Mubery, the Executive Vice President and Group Chief Executive of Gaming at Scientific Games, said, "Using our systems to help players play responsibly and within their budgets is a great step forward." A goal of evaluative research such as this is to provide information to the Gaming Commission for understanding whether or not this is the case. To that end, there are several purposes to this study. First, we sought to complete the first phase of a planned multi-year research and development agenda. This study and these results that we'll discuss today are not the end of the story. Second, we wanted to describe the initial use patterns of Play My Way. Third, we hope to study a sample of Play My Way users and provide a first look at how the use of Play My Way might relate to gambling activity. And fourth, we aim to lay the foundation for future evaluative work and the development of data-informed goals for the system. What do I mean by that? Well, we see this study and the development of Play My Way as part of an iterative feedback loop and reporting loop. It starts with an initial program development and moves to monitoring and assessment, in particular for safety, effectiveness, and impact. After such assessment, the loop includes a summarization of findings, which are contained in a comprehensive report that will be available on the Gaming Commission's website and on the division's website. And this includes the identification of areas in need of improvement. The final phase of the loop includes revising the program to achieve the improvements according to the desired goals. So I'll segue now to how we actually went about all of this. The Play My Way software system is available to Marquee Rewards cardholders. It's a voluntary system, and users can designate any combination of daily, weekly, or monthly loss budgets. The system provides its users with notifications when they approach, reach, and exceed their self-determined budgets. Users have the option to play beyond their budgets. This is a soft stop approach. At EGMs, electronic gaming machines, or GameSense kiosks, people can enroll, unenroll, set budgets, change budgets, and check their actual gambling spending. I'll briefly describe the setting for Play My Way. Plainridge Park Casino is a slot parlor with about 1,365 gaming stations, places where people can actually place a bet. The most common betting unit that we observed was 1 cent, and almost all gaming stations on the casino floor during our study period had betting units of $1 or less.
Excuse me, Debbie, I was struck by that. The most common betting unit is one penny?
According to our records, yes.
And what does that mean? I mean, people bet with just a penny?
Yes. Penny slots. Yeah, penny slots.
But that doesn't mean that every time they spin is worth 1 penny. The maximum bet on the penny denominations could be as much as $5, for example, on one spin.
Okay. One of the unique things about this study is the data that we used. Many program evaluations rely on survey research, which can suffer from limitations like poor response rates or self-report biases, such as faulty memory, self-presentation effects, or just miscomprehensions of the items that you're asking. This study used actual gambling and Play My Way system records, and therefore didn't struggle with these issues. There were other issues that we did struggle with, but I'll get to those later in this presentation. We had 2 primary sources of data for this study, period of June 8th, 2016 to January 31st, 2017. The first source is the ACSC server data that PPC uses for tracking cash and gambling activity. From this server, we were provided with data tables that included the machines that they had, user demographics, card and cash activity, and gambling activity with and without Play My Way active. The second is the Play My Way server. From this server, we had data that included things like enrollment and unenrollment records, budgets and budget sizes, and notifications. In an ideal world, these two sources of records would be linked for this research. That is, we'd be able to tie the records for an individual from one server to their records on the other server. This would allow us to answer interesting questions like, does gambling behavior change once people enroll in Play My Way? Or does gambling behavior change once people receive a budget notification? However, the linked data was not available to us at the time of this study, and we couldn't answer questions like these in this report. As I'll discuss in more detail at the end of this presentation, we're working with Plainridge Park Casino, the Gaming Commission, and Scientific Games to secure usable linked records for future research. So what data do we actually get from these servers? The ACSC server included records from about 101,000 Marquee Rewards cardholders, of which nearly 60% were women and 3/4 were from Massachusetts. Most individuals were in their late 50s. The Play My Way server data included records from about 7,500 program enrollees. Now, describing every single result that was in our report is beyond the scope of this presentation, and probably your desire for how long we would like to speak. Today, our general focus areas include cash activity, such as bill insertions, gambling activity, such as wagering behavior, and Play My Way activities, such as enrollment. One point of clarification, under gambling activity, by PPC visitations, we refer to the days that a person goes to Plainridge Park Casino and places at least one bet or pays for at least one handle pull. Now, usually a recap of study limitation waits until the very end of a presentation. However, because of the uniqueness of this approach and the available data that we had, I thought it was important to state some of the limitations prior to reporting on the results. I'll reiterate them again later. First, none of the results provide causal evidence related to Play My Way. That is, it's not possible at this time to say whether Play My Way caused one outcome or another. Second, although some analyses reflect general pre-commitment goals, these aren't the only goals that are possible and are not informed by the current analyses. There's little publicly available research that looks at pre-commitment by using actual gambling records. This means that determining the evaluative benchmarks in advance for this project would have been difficult. Without the information provided by this study, the Gaming Commission will be able to make data-informed decisions about how they'd like Play My Way to operate moving forward, and subsequently more specific evaluative approaches can emerge. Finally, there are some important known data limitations. These include, for instance, unexplained gaps in gambling records for Play My Way users, our inability to link the Play My Way records and the ACSC records that I described before, and data pull idiosyncrasies that led to data loss depending on the date of Play My Way enrollment. That said, what do we know about Play My Way?
Debbie, can I stop you there? What's the order of magnitude of these unexplained gaps in the data loss that you refer to here?
What is the most severe data limitation? Is that what you're asking?
No, just the, I mean, you describe here unexplained gaps in the gambling records and data loss due to data pull idiosyncrasies, et cetera. My question is sort of, the phrase I used was order of magnitude. Is there any way of sort of generalizing as to how serious the gaps were, for example, or the data loss was?
We observed data loss for a few weekends. Some of them were, might be key weekends. For example, over the 4th of July holiday.
So 2 weekends out of a six-month period.
It was more than 2 weekends. It was closer to 3 or 4 data gap instances.
There are a few of those. There are a few, few evenings, consecutive evenings that were lost, or that we didn't have data for. So that it's hard to say whether you could interpolate from other data, whether you could reconstruct the data. It's not something that
Okay. Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, you want to get the mic closer to you.
Yeah, sure.
I can't really draw any immediate conclusions as far as whether it's possible to recover that data or interpolate that data or do anything else, do any similar statistical processes. So,
Well, we're talking a relatively small number of weekends out of the
8-month period.
the period, is it 8 months or what was
Yeah,
it?
it's about 8 months. And I remember actually the July 4th, it was something related to the CMS, that, there was some loss of data, but.
In terms of a period of time in comparison to the overall period, it's actually a very small percentage of time where there are those types of gaps for whatever reason.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'll start right now with some basic enrollment and unenrollment information that we observed using the Play My Way server data. We noted that Play My Way breaks down into 3 primary types of enrollees. Stable enrollees who enrolled in Play My Way and then remained enrolled in Play My Way throughout our study period. About 85% of people were stable. Erratic enrollees who enrolled and unenrolled and then re-enrolled by the end of the study period. And dropouts who enrolled and unenrolled by the end of the study period. This was a minority, about 14%. Gross enrollment, the red line on top during our study period, increased steadily over time, as did gross unenrollment, the green line, albeit at a much lower rate. The ACSC server data contains evidence that over 8,800 people enrolled in Play My Way. However, the data we received from the Play My Way server only had enrollments for roughly 7,500 cardholders. This suggests that some information might have been lost from the Play My Way server. We don't have an explanation beyond that. As you might expect, enrollment rates by date were higher after the program launch, when there was an intense introductory promotional period, and decreased over time and seemed to flatten and stabilize by the end of the study period. Now recall that 85% of people were stably enrolled in Play My Way. Among the 15% of others who were erratic or remained unenrolled, this graph shows that unenrollment happened fairly quickly, within the first day. It's difficult to tell what actually happened during that first day from this graph, so in the next, we'll take a closer look. Here you can see what actually happened during the first day. Using arbitrary time units, we observed specifically that about 5% of all unenrollments occurred within the first minute after enrollment. About 1/3 of unenrollments occurred within the first hour, and half occurred by the end of the first day of enrollment. So among the minority who unenrolled, it happened quickly for about half of them. Among the rest of the minority who unenrolled, the speed slowed, about 3/4 unenrolled after a month. The final unenrollment in our sample occurred 232 days after enrollment. To sum up, enrollment appeared to be mostly stable during our study period, but daily enrollments in the program decreased over time before stabilizing. A minority of people actually unenrolled in the program, but when they did, it tended to happen quickly as soon as the first day. I'd like to turn now to some observations that we made about individuals' use of Play My Way in their cash and gambling activity. These observations utilize data from the ACSC server, and then we compare non-users, that is people who have never had a record of using Play My Way, with Play My Way users, that is people who ever had a record of using Play My Way. Please note that ever having a record of using Play My Way does not imply that those people always use Play My Way. It just refers to the fact that they have an enrollment record. Their cash and gambling activity records can include a mixture of play that is and is not associated with Play My Way. The group designates people who are willing to sign up for the program. One of the first things we examined was Plainridge Park Casino visitation trends by Play My Way use. Recall that PPC visitation trends refers to records that indicate that an individual gambled at Plainridge Park Casino on a particular day. If someone visited without gambling, they would not be counted. If someone gambled without use of their Marquee Rewards card, they wouldn't be counted. On the left, you can see a cumulative number of visits per day for non-users, and on the right, you can see cumulative number of visits per day for Play My Way users. For non-users, in the red, we see a marginal increase in cumulative number of non-user visitors during the summer months relative to the winter months. And cumulative number of Play My Way visitors per day increased initially, that's in the blue. In the months of December and January, we see a drop in Play My Way using visitors to Plainridge Park Casino.
Does this, I'm sorry, does this say, if you overlay those two, it looks like in general, particularly after the first few months, or first maybe month, that the Play My Way users are more intense gamblers. Because at any given point in time, there are a higher percentage of users gambling than there are non-users. Am I interpreting that right?
I think that what may appear, that it might appear that way because the scales are different on these
Oh, the
particular
scales are different?
graphs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that's so that you can see what's happening within each
Okay.
group.
Yeah, but in terms of number of visits, they're roughly the same,
They are?
yes.
Okay. Do you do that? You don't really profile them. You could pull out certain profile points, but you don't really profile them side by side. I mean, you do talk about men versus women, you do talk about age, but frequency of visit, amount of play, we don't really profile them. That'd be something interesting to see at some point, would be to, as many variables as you could think of. What are the profiles of non-users and what are the profiles of users? Okay.
Can I ask a question that I looked at these graphs beforehand, and I wrote myself a note as to what I thought that it represented, and I'll just read you my note and you tell me if I'm off. And overall, a generally similar pattern, but Play My Way users increase visitation later in the year, in the September to November period, while non-users peaked in July and August. Is that right?
That would sum up those graphs.
Oh,
correct.
okay.
Yeah.
Good job, Lloyd.
Okay, so I get an A?
But it could
Commissioner,
all be due to chance. There's no, right?
We don't
There's
know
no
right
reason-
now. This could be a characteristic of the time period that we looked at.
Yep.
You know, we don't know whether it's just an idiosyncratic, aspect of this particular snapshot.
Yep.
Or something more characteristic.
Yep.
And to add on to that, the sample of Play My Way users is a much, much smaller sample than the overall visitors, non-Play My Way visitors to Plainridge Park Casino. So there may be some differences in there, but it could have something to do with kind of just the sample size for
For
Play
the
My Way
sample
users.
type. Play My Way users are not necessarily a representative sample of the overall population,
Right.
which is where I want to go eventually.
And Commissioner McDonald, you can see the graph on the right. You can see the gaps where there wasn't data.
Right.
It doesn't give it specifics, but you can see in terms of a relatively how big of an issue that was.
Oh, going back to my earlier question, I see, I mean, where there, you're saying where there are gaps here in this graph, that actually reflects the gaps that were earlier referenced.
Gaps in data, yes.
Gaps in data, so that's a very insignificant.
Any other questions? Okay. So the next question we wanted to look at was, did Play My Way users and non-users do different things when they actually visited Plainridge Park Casino? And we found that Play My Way users were more likely to use the electronic table games, but similar to others in their use of slot machines and video poker terminals. Interestingly, Play My Way users inserted more cash into electronic gaming machines, but they also withdrew more cash from the machines, and they redeemed more vouchers from machines.
Can I ask about that? And I know you mentioned upfront that there is no evidence of causality, but I just find it very interesting that they kind of like work in opposite direction. Somebody who's inserting more cash but playing less, as opposed to the non-user. Is there anything there for us to think about, to follow up?
I think it's definitely worth looking at this again with new data. And I think that as far as them having kind of a bigger bank in play, we don't really know much about Play My Way users beyond the fact that they enrolled in Play My Way. We know a little about gender, a little bit about age. We don't know anything about their means. So we don't know if they're from distinctly different socioeconomic, class or anything like that. And there are any number of variables like that that could play a role in some of these differences. Play My Way also could play a role in some of these differences. And at this point, we just don't have the information to say one way or another.
Fair enough.
In terms of actual gambling activity, these cash actions translated into lower totals amounts wagered per day, per week, and per month for Play My Way users. Play My Way users also evidenced fewer net losses. However, they visited Plainridge Park Casino during the study period about the same amount of times as non-users. Both groups visited a median of 2 times.
Can you say that again?
Both groups visited a median of 2 times during the study period.
And wagers is defined as what?
Making a bet.
So does that count the churn? In other words, if you put in $100 and then you win 100, so now you've got 200 in credit, you play against that 200, you've wagered 200, even though actually cash out of your pocket is 100?
Well,
Yes,
I,
it does. Did you have more to say?
I mean, it measures cash activity, so it would measure it at cash in, and it would measure it at cash out.
Right.
So what happens in between there, there's bound to be ups and downs. And
Right.
you're saying that it measures all of those ups and downs along the way.
Well, amount wagered is strict. It's almost, I wouldn't say it's independent of, but it's different from amount won or lost. Let's go back to, you're asking about penny slots. So let's say I'm playing a penny slot, but it's 50 lines. So that's 50 cents per time I hit the spin button. Let's say I do that 10 times. So 1 penny, 50 lines, 50 cents a bet, do that 10 times, what did I say, 50 cents, 10 times, $5. That's going to be $5 total wagered, regardless of how many lines I win on, how much I win on those lines, whatever.
So it's a number of spins, or the value of the total
Value.
number of spins.
Right.
But in order
It's not a
to,
contest.
I should know this, but in order to play a penny slot and on 50 lines, you have to have put in at least 50 cents, right? You have to have enough money in the bank to cover it. You can't just put in a penny.
Correct.
Right.
That's right.
That's right.
So in that scenario, if you put in 50 cents and you then have the multiple plays you're talking about,
No, you spin once.
well, you spin once, okay, you've wagered 50 cents or $5?
50 cents.
Because that's one spin. You said 50 cent, you said one spin.
One spin, right,
50 cents, that'd be total of 50 cents wagered.
right.
What if you spin 10
If you sp-
times?
If you spin 10
$5.
times,
You
then you have wagered $5.
Yes.
And if you, for the sake of discussion, if you've lost, you walk away thinking, well, I lost my 50 cents because you only put 50 cents in,
No,
or you have to have more in.
no, you paid a minimum, you played a minimum of $5. You could have gone up and gone down and gone up,
So you,
but,
because you,
but you've lost
because your
$5.
cash in, you had to have $5 in there in order to play 10 times. If you only put in $2, you couldn't keep clicking.
Well, it all depends every
Unless
time.
you won.
It all depends on what happens on every spin.
Yeah.
But But adding the number of spins times the value of the spin gives you the total wager,
But I'm sure. if I-
whatever you put at risk
I'm not,
before.
I'm gonna take
before-
one shot at this, and I'm
Okay.
gonna drop it if this doesn't helpful. I put in 50 cents, and I spin once.
What happened?
You win a lot.
Okay, good.
And then you keep pumping, and say your wins have gone up to $5, so you can play against your $5. You keep playing, then you lose everything, and you go home. Out of your pocket has been 50 cents, but in the process of playing, you had more money, which you eventually lost. That person would be deemed to have wagered how much?
The total number of
No,
spins
that's kidding.
times
So
the value.
it would depend on how much you want. You would have a net loss of 50 cents. How, your
That
total,
wouldn't be called, but you wouldn't have just wagered 50 cents. You would have wagered
Correct.
however much you won and then lost again.
correct. And if you think about it, you could have won and lost some of it, then won more and
Right.
lost more. And it could go up and down, and then eventually bottom out at a net loss of 50 cents. But how you got there would determine what your total amount wagered was.
Okay.
So
It-
the wager figure is a cumulative figure.
Yeah.
And I think this explains the difference between the net winnings on this slide and the much, much higher amount wagered, correct? That's the amount that was wagered. The person is walking away with negative $89.
Right.
Yeah, because not very many people, this is cumulative over the 8 months, right?
Some of them are per day and some of them are per month.
But this one,
Then,
No,
are
it's
you
a
speaking
per
of the-
day, per week, per month.
oh, I see, sorry.
Those are the different outcomes.
Yeah.
that
And then the
we're
net
calling
winning.
it.
Sorry, right. Right. Okay. Thank you.
The one thing that's consistent here is everybody loses, whether you're on Play My Way or not.
Right. Okay.
And Play My Way users seem somewhat more conservative from the start and over time. This figure displays average amount lost per day and by Play My Way use status. You can see that among non-users, amount lost per day increased slightly over the study period, whereas amount lost per day was lower and more variable for Play My Way users. Some of this difference in the variable pattern might relate to the data issues that I described earlier. Finally, in some
Well,
other
can I
ways,
ask, just on this, because this is potentially significant graph, and also it seems like there may be some risk of it's being misinterpreted. The caution that you made before about the limitations in the data being ones that prevent you from being able to establish a causal connection, is it fair to say that in looking at this delta between the red and the blue lines, that you would be hesitant to say that's because of Play My Way?
yes,
that-
yeah. It's still,
that
we're
the-
still just looking at associations between whether or not you have ever enrolled in Play My Way and these various outcomes. So the association is there, but it's not sufficient to say that Play My Way did this.
I like to think about it like in the analogy to the Fitbit.
To the Fitbit?
To the Fitbit, which is strikes me that there's a case to be made that Fitbit users are more likely exercisers, regardless whether they have a Fitbit or not. It makes intuitive sense.
So
But-
just because all Fitbit users take more steps doesn't necessarily mean they did it because of Fitbit.
Precisely. Which is part of the causality, but Fitbit users might actually, the Fitbit might actually help them continue exercising or exercising what they intended, or right?
Yep.
Which is a,
I like
you
that
know,
analogy.
All right.
And if the goal of the program is to provide people with information to support their decisions, whether it be a Fitbit informing the number of steps that you want to take,
Right.
or a tool like Play My Way to establish how much you're willing to budget or spend, Both are about informed user choice.
Right. But just maybe a Fitbit, so if I give somebody a Fitbit and they say, well, I'll try it, they might turn out to become more exercisers than what they were otherwise, which is the thing that we need to think about.
Or you may use it sometimes and not others.
Sometimes and
Case in
others.
point.
Yeah.
All right. Finally, in some other ways, Play My Way users and non-users were similar. Here's an example. To gain an understanding of the betting typologies amongst the two groups, we performed a cluster analysis on total amount wagered, net winnings, and number of visits. For both users and non-users, we observed two natural betting groups that we call typical and atypical.
Before we go further, and I want to make sure I don't disrupt too much the flow. Can you help me understand how you define typical and atypical for both sets of players?
So this was defined statistically through the cluster analysis, using the variables total amounts wagered, net winnings, and number of visits.
91, 95, or 99%? What's the cutoff? How did you cut off? Standard deviation or?
It's not really a percentage cutoff like that.
Okay.
Through do you want to talk about cluster analysis?
What,
little bit.
just
Yeah.
in layman's terms, what makes somebody atypical?
So essentially what we do in a cluster analysis is we say, suppose there are two sort of centers or two locations that all of one group sort of revolve around and all of the other group revolve around. So there's no actual hard percentage. Oh, it's got to be 95-5. Oh, it has to be 90-10. It's just what sort of centers as far as average amount bet and the other variables. What centers make sense and sort of what people or what data points belong in what group. It's not.
Before we get into the groups, though, and I realize that you did it for the groups, just help me understand what makes an atypical player. Is that the point at the very top over there, or does that include 5 others, and where was the cutoff? How do you define typical versus atypical?
So the definitions for the not definitions but classifications were based on the data themselves, and it was done with the software we use, just as you can see in the pictures, just sort of separate those two groups. There's no there is a rule, but and we could go back and reconstruct the rule itself. But it was, I think the more important point is that that when you look at the scatter plots, that you can see distinct groups of players. That's more.
I don't know that I understand. I look forward to the rule if you need to come back, but I'm asking a straightforward question, I think. How do you define atypical player?
How different did you have to be?
How
from the
different do you have
norm
to be?
To be called atypical. You know?
What makes me atypical, regardless of what group I'm in the scattershot, one or the other, or both combined? What makes me atypical?
I think
The amount wagered, the amount, how different I wager, how many times I go.
Right.
So the 3 variables that were used to define it were amount wagered, net loss, and number of visits. If you were higher than the general mean of the rest of the players on any one of those variables, you could have been low on one and high on the other. If you were high enough on the other, you would probably get into the atypical group as
How
opposed to the
higher?
typical. It depends on the means of everybody. It's based on all of their means.
So if
It's a
depends on the
complicated
other-
algorithm
it
that's,
depends on
in the
the
context of this meeting, just can't be easily explained.
Okay. Well, I look
But
forward
that's
to
kind
an
of the simplistic
explanation.
explanation. We can kind of give it to you.
Did you say it depends on the means of the
Of the
players?
whole group of players.
No, mean, not the means.
The mean, the
mean.
arithmetic mean.
Yeah, I don't mean.
Yeah, okay,
mean.
yeah.
But maybe there's a weighted average sort of
Yeah.
formula, complicated formula.
It's a complicated formula.
Yeah.
You just can't get into the calculus that's
Okay.
involved in it.
Well, I'm very interested in, at least conceptually, understanding a little bit more what that is. But you can get back to me on the details.
I mean, to a certain extent, it's statistically determined. You know, we're not going in and saying, we are not going in and saying if they hit this level, that puts them in this group and that puts them in this group.
Right.
We're letting the software do some of the exploration of the data, asking it, you know, does the data naturally fall into 2 groups? Does it naturally fall into 3 groups? Does it naturally fall into 4 groups? What's the best fit for this data? And the statistical analysis that we did suggested that the best fit for this data naturally grouped into 2 separate groups. One that consisted of most players and one that consisted of the outliers. We considered those outliers to be the atypical groups.
But I'm not far off, at least conceptually, thinking that, and this is not a normal distribution, I get you that with that mindset, the people who are really at the tail end of some distribution, with all these factors that you've combined. Somebody who falls off some whatever variation metric, maybe it's not the standard deviation, but some variability, after some variability, they're really after that. Because you have means and you have aggregated them and whatnot.
Is it fair to say that, in looking at these 2 graphs, that the outliers are these little dots that are outside of the monochromatic clusters?
Yeah.
Is that what that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to point out for this again is that just to note that the scales on these graphs are different, and this is so that you can actually see what's happening among the Play My Way user group. What I think is important to observe about these figures is that for both the users and the non-users, the bulk of gamblers represented by the black circles were what we called typical, and the atypical users represented by the color circles were mainly the outliers. Those outliers for both the Play My Way users and non-users wagered more money, made more visits, and lost more money compared to the typical players.
The non-users, is it fair to, I mean, I know this is very, I'm just visualizing here. The non-users seem more clustered together, obviously. Right? Is there any inference
Part of that is the scale, I think.
Oh, okay. If you put them at the same scale, would
So-
that make any difference visually, at least?
I'm
Or
not sure, everything in the Play My Way user group will be much more scrunched together.
Also,
Yep.
also it'll be tough to see because there's, I think, a 10-to-1 ratio, that there are more non-users than users. So
Right.
when you try to differentiate the two in a single scatter plot, it could get messy.
So the Play My Way user group on the right, that's kind of the zoomed in look. So you can actually see the difference between the groups.
okay.
So you broke it into the 2 groups, typical and atypical users, non-users. But I was thinking that you would, is there a purpose to that, to begin talking about what atypical users look like versus typical in each of the groups? And possibly, what can you say compared atypical to atypical users, non-users, and typical users, non-users?
Yes, I mean, we can't, this is one of the things that we can't draw direct comparisons across these groups because of some of the data idiosyncrasies that we already talked about. These groups, the cutoffs that were used to create the separation between typical and atypical for the non-users. The cutoff was different among the users. So it wouldn't be appropriate to do a cross comparison at this point. I think in the future, when we have the improved data with fewer gaps and a better understanding of the linkage between the Play My Way and the gambling and cash activity, and hopefully some of the data pull idiosyncrasies resolved, that will allow us to do a more direct comparison that I think you're looking for.
Yeah, I was really intrigued when I first read the draft of the report, not the presentation, about these, which is why I was asking about the atypical players here and how they were defined, that there's really something for us to think about. I really am wondering whether atypical players, however we define them, have higher rates of adoption of Play My Way, first and foremost. Then, of course, where you're getting at, which is if Play My Way is affecting behavior, for which we need all these data, linkage and things like that. That's obviously the next phase. But simply just the rate of adoption, I'm really at a first pass, I only added arithmetically, and I didn't understand that there's all these multi-factors in a statistical world that are making them atypical. But at a first pass, it looked to me that maybe these atypical players have a higher rate of adoption compared to the rest of the population. And if so, I think that would be a fantastic finding. I'm not saying that that we have it.
I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah. And to expand on that, which relates to something that Commissioner Zuniga has brought up previously, it would be interesting to know the adoption rates within every cross-section of intensity. As a practical matter, speaking layman's language, if you're what we refer to as a casual gambler that is less than 11 times a year, we don't really care very much whether you adopt Play My Way or not. It's kind of interesting to look at, but it's people who are in the heavier groups
The intense gamblers.
that by sort of abstract definition, we are more concerned about. Because the next group, people who gamble, say, between 12 and 36 times a year, are the people who are more likely to be at risk of drifting into the problem gambling. So are the adoption rates by segment, however you define those segments, by intensity segment, similar or not? That would be incredibly interesting variable as we go along here.
Well, if there's three variables that you're using, amount lost, frequency of visits, and what was the third one? Total wager. Different aspects of a pre-commitment tool will work better for you, right? If you are heavy visitation, maybe the monthly is something that might be a lot more effective. If you are heavy gambler, the budget figure may be more relevant and could cause somebody to consider whether we're better off offering more or incentivizing other things.
All right, to sum up our observations related to the cash and gambling activity, we found that Play My Way users and non-users had some similarities, such as their typical number of visits and the natural groups that comprise them. There also were some differences. Cash and gambling activity suggested that Play My Way might be associated with more conservative behaviors for these factors. And finally, just to reiterate, as with all outcomes, we can't make causal attribution to Play My Way for these findings, but the associations are suggestive, I think, and worthy of continued investigation. I'll turn now to some observations that we made from the Play My Way server data related to Play My Way budgets and notification activity. We found that most users, 57%, set only a daily budget, which you can see in the large yellow circle on the bottom. About 9% set only a weekly budget, which is represented by the blue circle on the upper right, and about 19% set only a monthly budget, which is apparent in the red circle on the upper left. The rest of Play My Way users set some combination of budgets. 15% set a combination of 2 budgets, and 12% set a combination of all 3 budgets. If someone set more than 1 budget, they were most likely to set all 3. About 78% of people who set more than 1 budget set all 3 types. And
So
budgets at enrollment.
That's the 892? That the gray?
Correct,
That's
the gray.
So they set all 3 budgets?
Correct, the gray in the middle there. Yep. Budgets at enrollment indicated that most set a daily budget of around $75, a weekly budget of around $200, and a monthly budget of around $300. The figure on the right shows that the budgets in our sample were skewed. We observed high standard deviations around the mean budgets. Budgets at enrollment had a maximum of $25,000 for daily, $50,000 for weekly, and $100,000 for monthly.
Can I ask a question on this? Just a little bit of a thought. Could something like this maximums based on, some of the other medians, could that explain perhaps somebody desiring to use this tool as simply as a way to check their total play, not caring about notifications, for example,
That's possible, yes.
or the $5 incentives?
That too.
It's always,
Yeah.
there's always that one.
Either is possible. Or, sorry. Look, I'll get to a point related to that in a minute. Yeah.
Deborah, on this median daily budget is for those people who enrolled was $75. Back on the slide we were talking about earlier, the gambling activity by Play My Way use has the total amount wagered per day and the median for Play My Way users is 285, almost 4 times the median, the average or median budget. Are those numbers counted the same way? If you set a budget for $75, is that calculated the same way as wagers?
Well, these are separate systems. So the wagers are calculated in the ACST server system, and these budget numbers are from the Play My Way server system. These are simply the things that are the information that's input by all the players who are enrolled in Play My Way, and we're
But you
calculating
then-
those averages and medians from the Play My Way server.
But you then have to calculate, the machine has, you set a budget for 75.
I think that's the number. The number to compare the 75 is the 89 loss.
So they aren't,
Remember, the budget is about the
right.
losing.
So when you calculate when the machine calculates your budget, does it go through, you budget 75, you then win 1,000, you then lose the 1,000. Then you lose 925. That doesn't tell you you've hit your cap, right?
No, I like, as I've described it, it measures the actual money that you take out of your pocket, purse, put it into the machine. So
Right.
that's the net winnings or net losses. And so I think you're looking for how do you square the $75 average with what the actual play what was actual. And I wouldn't look at the total amount wagered. I would look at the net winnings, the
Right,
bottom
which is
line,
what
the negative
Commissioner Stebbins just said, right.
$89.
But okay, we agree on that. Yeah.
I'll say recall that the budgets that people set indicate the point at which they might receive notifications about whether they're approaching their budget, have reached their budget, or have exceeded their budget. You can see here that just over 40% of people did not ever approach their budget, This means that they never received a notification from the system related to their budget. Nearly 60% of people who set a budget received at least one notification that they were approaching their budget. Among those who received such a notification, 3/4 received a notification that they reached their budget. So that means among those who actually approached, 75% of those people went on and reached their budget. Among those who received notification that they reached their budget, 85% of those people received at least one notification that they exceeded their budget. In all, about 37% of all users exceeded their budget. Now, we were curious about the distribution of, whether the distribution of budgets might play a role in whether or not people received notifications. So this gets to your question, Commissioner Zuniga, about whether or not they're using it for some other purpose, or maybe they're using it for a gift card or something like that. So we looked at the budget sizes that people set for daily, weekly, and monthly budgets. And we also looked at whether there was evidence that budgets were so high that they were unlikely to represent their actual play. Although for daily budgets, we did observe some budgets that were so high that no one ever received a notification relative to that amount. For weekly and monthly budget sizes, we observed that the budgets were aligned with notifications, indicating that people might be selecting budgets that represented their likely play.
On a monthly basis, or for Monday?
For weekly and monthly.
Right.
Now, people could respond to notifications in a variety of different ways. In this initial report, we examined 3 primary outcomes related to this. We wanted to look at how people might have responded with budget changes, with system unenrollment, and with budget compliance.
I'm sorry, this just hit me. Can I go back a little bit to the prior slide? Could something like this, if a game sense advisor was to ask how much of a player are you? Are you an intense, and this sounds sort of intuitive as I'm saying it. If you're an intensive gambler, you're better off thinking in terms of a monthly budget. I recommend you try that one, as opposed to a daily budget.
Maybe. I think that that's one strategy. It depends on what you want them to use the system to do. If you want them to use the system to provide more immediate notifications of what they're doing on a particular day, then you would still recommend that they use the daily. If you want them to have a more global notification, then maybe you would recommend the monthly.
Right. But is it fair to say that given this graph, the people who acted on a monthly budget were more likely to approximate it compared to people who were setting daily budgets?
There were just a few extremely high daily budgets, which you can see in the column that's to the furthest left. We don't really know why they're as high as they are, so I'm not sure how far I would want to take that as far as the psychology of behind the setting of the budget, which is, I think, what you're getting at.
Yeah,
I don't know how far I would take that at this point.
right.
Does this say that some people set a daily budget of $25,000?
Doesn't
So-
mean they reached it, though.
No, I know, but the mean was $75, right? But the first number you even have on the graph is 5,000.
No, but each one of these are like points. There's a lot of dots.
Yeah, but the way these dots read, it looks like an awful lot of people set their budget higher than $5,000.
No,
These are the non-users, right? Or are
No.
these graphs for all users? I'm sorry, for only play-by-my-way users?
Yes, because
Yes.
it's just notifications, right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and the the left-hand column is the daily budget that you set, correct?
Yes.
And,
No, I'm sorry. Yes,
Daily budget.
with no notification.
right. So,
In the column on the right for each are budgets that were set, and people actually received a notification for budgets
right.
of that size.
But I'm just looking at the code of the colored-in dots, and it looks like from this chart that an awful lot of users sent their budgets higher than $5,000, which doesn't make sense to me. Is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, I think also
Or is there a
because
zero missing, an extra zero here?
They're
no,
overlapping.
I think the colors, because there are so many observations, that can be a little bit deceiving. So the first one, it has a median of actually 100, and the second one with people
Sorry,
who receive.
what has a median of 100?
So the no notification.
Oh, yeah.
But
Okay.
it looks like there's an awful lot of people in 5,000 range, and which is true, but it doesn't portray that the median is actually only 100. And the second one, people who receive notifications, the median is 32. So it can be a little bit confusing because of the distribution is so.
Okay.
Could you put this in a histogram, by the way?
Yeah,
That,
one of
to
the.
break out
yeah.
the horizontal?
One of the challenges is the distribution tends to be so wide. Some people have all the way out to 25,000, and
Right.
the median's only 100. So we have that challenge of trying to show the variation.
Maybe
And
logarithmically?
Yeah, in some cases, we just want to focus on
But, yeah, but
signal.
in this particular column, if the median is 75, you can barely even, your eyeball can barely even find it on this chart. It's so close to the zero. So that must mean that there's thousands of people lumped under the very bottom of that blue column. Okay, well, I'd be interested to know, I guess what you asked,
A histogram that breaks
be able
out.
to see it, forget the guys who put 25,000, we're not, they're playing games, but what's bunched into that lower end of the
Well,
scale?
I'm actually more interested in this graph.
Both sides.
In this graph, on the upper end, but see how many people are above 5,000 and are reaching the notification. So
Yeah.
they're again, gambling intensity,
Right,
setting a budget for 5,000 or more and reaching certain notifications.
right. Okay.
Okay. We found that users who approached their budgets were more likely to change their budgets than those who never approached their budgets. Only 1.6% of those who never approached changed their budgets, whereas 9.5% of those who approached their budgets changed their budgets. Also, users who reached their budgets were more likely than those who just approached their budgets to change. 13% of those who reached their budgets changed their budgets, whereas 9.5% of those who approached their budgets changed their budgets. Okay.
Does that tell us anything about notifications, for example? Amount or notifications?
Not yet.
We're hoping it will.
Not amount, yeah.
Commissioner, do you mean the number of notifications that are delivered
Yes.
to
Right.
patrons? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, not yet.
I'm very interested in that. I think I mentioned this before. We started with an assumption about those notifications. I remember, well, Debbie, you and all your colleagues said, let's set it instead at 50, 75, 100. It just seemed, more intuitive, I guess. But I'm really interested in the effect of those notifications, whether they're turning people off or really, or at least some people, or really affecting, what they do.
And to expand on that, I'm curious as to whether people who set daily, weekly, and monthly would more likely receive more notifications because they would be receiving notifications based on three different gambling types. Intuitively, or what I think is worth investigating further, is if you set all three types, are you more likely to change your budget than if you enroll in just one type?
I think that's an interesting question, whether you're looking at. However, we also observed that users who exceeded their budgets were similar to but less likely than those who approached their budgets to change.
So can I ask on, on this one, just the bottom line of the people who exceeded their budget, and then going over the column, users who did not change a budget. So the number of people who exceeded their budget was 2,480. And the percentage is 87.7%, so that reflects that 2,480 people exceeded their budget and did not change their budget.
That's correct.
They may just be happy being reminded every now and then.
And here are the types of changes that users made. You can see that moving left to right for daily, weekly, and monthly budget changes, most changes were upward revisions. The median daily budget changed from $75 to $350. The median weekly budget changed from $200 to $900, and the median monthly budget changed from $300 to $1,000.
Is the box represent some kind of
Spread?
spread?
Yes.
What's that spread?
What is that?
Statistic?
So it's the middle line is the median, and the bottom of the box is the 25th percentile, and the top of the box is the 75th percentile.
75, okay.
Next, we looked at whether notifications seem to be associated with unenrollment from Play My Way.
Sorry, just one, the axis is the same for daily, weekly, and monthly. It only goes up to 4,000. How does that compare to the numbers on the budget sizes and notifications chart?
Those are budget changes.
So also in this one, we, like Commissioner Zuniga was saying, if we looked at the entire spectrum, we would miss the signals. So we did not include the observations that were like 25,000 or things like that, so we
Okay.
could focus on the distribution we're interested in.
Yeah, it's truncated.
Yeah,
Okay, well, that's an important distinction
Yeah.
that isn't explained here.
yeah.
Yeah. Recall that unenrollment happened quickly for about half of those who unenrolled and more gradually for others. Because of this, we looked at unenrollment patterns for those who did it within one day, separately from others. Among those who unenrolled within one day, those who never approached their budgets were most likely to unenroll. This was about 12% of those who never approached. Among those who unenrolled after one day, those who reached or exceeded their budgets were most likely to unenroll. This was about 12% and 15% respectively. This suggests the need for more research to determine whether these reach and exceed notifications for those with longer enrollment with Play My Way play a causal role in unenrollment. Like you said, is the number of the number of notifications that people are receiving, is that one of the things that related to unenrollment? Finally, we looked at ongoing notification instances to gain insight into whether people stopped gambling after receiving notification that they reached their budget. Just as a reminder, Play My Way is a soft stop system, which means that people can reach their budget and exceed their budget and keep going if they want. The system doesn't make a judgment about which decision is appropriate. For this analysis, we looked at 2,271 steady users, or those who had instances of hitting their daily budgets, but also didn't change their budgets or unenroll that same day. We found that nearly 9% of steady users who reached their budget received at least one additional notification. This means that, we found that nearly 9% did not receive a notification again after they reached their budget. This indicates that they might have stopped gambling. It's also possible that they stopped using their Marquee Rewards card to gamble and were gambling incognito, so to speak. About 91%.
But just to try to put into words what you just said, this suggests is that approximately 9% appear to have stopped after receiving a notification.
Correct.
After being told they hit their limit, right?
Yeah.
They hit their budget, right?
Yeah, the additional notification here is after they've hit their budget,
So are
not the
these,
50% or 75%.
Say that again.
Am I here to correct when I say that where it says no additional notifications means they've hit the 100% budget, and they did not receive the next one, which would have been the 125%.
so it's no additional,
Or if, yeah,
no additional notifications after being told they've hit their
They
budget.
hit their
That's right.
budget.
Right. Right. So you could perhaps 9% stop playing,
perhaps, yes.
perhaps, right?
Yep.
Is the same factor here? A bunch of people, a lot of people received 11 to 100 additional notifications. But it would be cumulative. If you were on a daily, weekly, and monthly budget, that would be cumulative, right? So that could be spread out across day, month, and week, that you receive all those notifications.
Nope, this refers.
No, this refers to just daily
Right.
budgets. We
Oh, you did,
only limited
yeah.
this to just daily budgets and daily budget notifications.
Right.
This is just daily?
Yep.
And this is over the course of the whole period?
Yeah.
So if you did 100, Deb's saying no?
Well, let me make sure I understand your question first.
Well,
Go ahead.
it's concerning. It's just on the face of it, to say that 46% of the people who got notified that they hit their daily budget got between 11 and 100 additional notices. And if you don't think about it very hard, just look at it, that looks like, wow, that's a lot of people playing a lot of times past. But if that's cumulative over 8 months, then that may or may not be as concerning as it looks on its face.
This is for a particular gambling event.
No, this specific one, there's a table that looks just like this, and we also show in the full report, that
Yeah.
shows all instances, which includes multiple people hitting their daily. This is taking all those people and adding all of their instances and all the additional notifications received in all instances. So it could be someone at one instance we got one additional notification. Another time they got 99, we just don't know the distribution.
But let me just
Okay.
make sure, so if I'm player card holder number 1, I set my daily budget on the first day of the study, and I then hit it again 99 more times, post-budget notification, I would be one of the people who had hit it 100 times, right? Because it's cumulative.
You've already hit it once
Yeah.
and then 99 times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Okay,
That's right.
so it's not as scary as it looks like, because this is
And there
a
are-
lot of notifications over an extended period of time.
And there are some other factors that can change how you'd view this as well. So it might be that people are just regularly really blowing past their budget. But another characteristic of the Play My Way system is that when a gambler kind of hovers around
Yes.
their particular budget, they could be crossing above and below
That's a good
that
point.
threshold. And that can inflate the number of notifications as well.
And so
But-
just to
but winning and
clarify, that
losing.
it
Yeah,
could
right.
be that the additional notification wasn't a notification exceeding 100%. It could be a notification, you you reset it. If you go past 100% and then you have a win that throws you down below 50%, and then you
Start the
reach
system.
50% again, that's an additional notification that's factored in here.
That's interesting, right. So that's important. So if you hit your budget and then you win, you play one more time and you win,
Big.
and then the system will recalculate that you're back down to whatever number you are. So you'll start getting notified again, because it's that net winnings tracking mechanism, right? Okay, that's interesting. Now, there's a ton to be learned here.
So to sum up what we learned about budgets and notifications, most users set daily budgets, and most received at least an approach notification. Receiving a notification was associated with progressing through the notification types, and notifications were associated with budget changes and unenrollment. They did not seem to elicit a self-imposed hard stop among users.
I'm sorry, say that one more time, please.
So people didn't use it, they weren't self-imposing a hard stop. So if they got a notification that they reached their budget, they weren't saying, oh, I need to stop and walk away,
Right.
at this point. They didn't put that on themselves. The system doesn't put it on themselves, but they didn't self-impose that as well.
Because that's the 9% number. If it's only 9% who got the notification and
90%.
to all outward appearances stopped. Right, so it's 91% that didn't do that. Right.
Can we calculate of those people who received notifications, if they dropped off more frequently than those who didn't?
So is unenrollment associated with
Notification?
notifications exceeding 100%?
Yes.
We could calculate that.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
we, not with the current data we have. I
Yeah.
think also a point Chairman Crosby made earlier about looking at enrollment across different spectrums of gambling.
Yep.
Those are very interesting questions, but right now, like Debbie mentioned, we couldn't link the enrollment data with the gambling activity data. We didn't have that link. So we couldn't do some of those analysis, and we look forward to
Right.
doing that once
Right.
we have that link.
Right.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd like to talk about today includes some age and gender observations. Recall that our ACSC server data included about 8,800 Play My Way users and 92,000 non-users. About half of all users were women. Enrollment rates among Marquee Rewards cardholders from various states were similar. Among those that we looked at, all around 8 to 9%. More specifically, the majority of Play My Way users were from Massachusetts, but 1% were from Connecticut, 9% from Rhode Island, and 5% of our sample were from New Hampshire. Play My Way users were slightly younger than non-users. They both were in their 50s. Our data indicated that age skewed to the younger ages. Okay.
Look at that. There's some number of players over 100 years old. That's
That's what they say.
That's pretty cool. That's what they
Yeah.
say, yeah, right.
Yep.
Probably not that many people exaggerate that they're over 100.
Women, as I said, made up a larger proportion of Play My Way users. You can see that by the width of the bar in red there. But in contrast, they also accounted for a smaller percent of the total amount wagered by Play My Way users. And you can tell that from the height difference between the two bars.
Can I just make a comment back on that last slide about the age of Play My Way use, is that the demographic here is really quite an old group. Although these people are a lot younger than I am, but at the same time, these are, I mean, Play My Way are 54 years old, and the non-users is 59 years old. This is
Pretty
not a
close-
millennial
it's
crowd.
pretty close to the audience,
It-
isn't it?
That's, I think it correlates very much to the
You're-
actual
Sorry.
people,
To what?
to the actual patrons.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm just making that point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
It's an old demographic.
And finally, the largest age cohort of Play My Way users was between 50 and 69. These folks accounted for the largest percent of total amount wagered in our sample. Summing up, Play My Way users tended to be female and middle-aged. Women participated in Play My Way more but wagered less. In contrast, individuals in their 50s and 60s participated in Play My Way more but also wagered more. As with the other findings, just a reminder that the causal attributions aren't possible for these observations. They're just associations.
But we do have at least, or where Plainridge Park Casino could actually have a profile of their users, of their players, their overall players.
They're cardholders.
Their cardholders,
Yeah.
right. Age, origin, Massachusetts.
We must too, right? If we have the
Yeah.
profile of
Yeah.
users, we must have it of non-users
Could,
as well.
could we attempt to, is it worthwhile to attempt to draw differences, for example, between the actual population? Is there any worthwhile?
One of the things,
things for us to consider.
so we reported on age and gender from the ACSC server. This was from the Play My Way server, I believe. And without the link, that comparison wouldn't quite be right at this time. But I think that once we can link, we can make more of a direct comparison about users and non-users and what their gender distribution looks like, what the age distribution looks like for both of those cohorts.
I seem to have been asking the same question in different ways all this time. But yeah, that linkage is very important, I think.
So I will wrap up by mentioning what I think are our main takeaway points from this initial study, its limitations and some future directions that we're considering.
Excuse me, Debbie, can we just go back to that, to the last slide before you get to the final points? The last bullet point, as with other comparisons, causal attributions are not possible for these observations. What would be needed on a going forward basis for being able to have the capability to make the causal attributions that you're referencing?
We'd like to have information that would allow us to not just look at a single moment in time. Causal attributions also could involve randomization. So if we did some type of a study where we asked people if they'd be willing to be randomized to engage in Play My Way or not engage in Play My Way, maybe they use their own budget system. And then we could compare those two different groups. We could look at whether their gambling behaviors differed over time. We could look at whether their visitations to Plainridge differed over time, their wagering, all of those interesting comparisons from the ACSC server that we talked about earlier. We could kind of look at those outcomes and see whether or not the people who are randomized to a Play My Way group looked more conservative, if that's what you want them to look like, or not. Okay. So our takeaways, we observed that enrollment is mainly stable during our study period. About 85% of enrollees remained enrolled. And Play My Way was associated with less cash activity and gambling activity, which potentially indicates a more conservative approach. Notifications were associated with upward budget revisions and unenrollment, and those are worthy of additional research. Finally, evidence of continued notifications after users reach their budgets suggests that people didn't self-impose a hard stop once they reached their budgets. More generally, we think that the findings provide a good early look into how real gamblers actually interact with the Play My Way system, and that the findings can guide discussions like this and other discussions of data-informed goals and future research topics. To reiterate some of the limitations, we can't assume that Play My Way caused any of these outcomes. Many data issues limited the areas of investigation that we wanted to pursue. It wasn't possible to tie the specific Play My Way actions to specific gambling actions, and this precluded some of the most interesting research questions. We can't determine the intent that Play My Way users held, for example, how people intend to use their budgets, or whether or not they intended to use them at all. Maybe, like Commissioner Zuniga said, they just wanted to enroll in the system so that they could track their spending, their actual spend over time. And finally, player responses in the study might not be the same at other properties, at Wynn or MGM. The study is not directly generalizable to those properties, which have very different gaming characteristics. In the future, we hope to obtain new data that links the Play My Way activity and cash and gambling records. In doing so, will allow us to examine differences between gambling behavior before and after enrollment, between gambling behavior before and after receiving notifications, and whether things like any gambling patterns or machine preferences are associated with Play My Way adoption. We'd also like to engage in survey research to gain some insight into player subjective experiences, so that we can gain an understanding of what Play My Way users like and dislike about the system, and what might be keeping non-users from deciding to enroll. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions. We can open for additional questions if you have them. And we also are prepared to talk about some of the more nitty-gritty details about the data limitations if you'd like as well.
Well,
Commissioner Zuna will
maybe
take
I'd
that
like to,
offline.
yeah, yes. I'm all about nitty-gritty, but, at a later time. Well, I think just that slide of future work is very apropos of what I've been alluding to, because I'm really intrigued by these atypical, or that then translates into heavy gambler or at-risk gambler in our responsible gaming framework discussion, how those people are using the tool, what might they be finding helpful to keep them to what they intended or intend to after they revise it, etc. Is something that I'm really intrigued about. As Chairman Crosby alluded to, if somebody who's betting $20 twice a year is using the tool, that's great. But some people here have medians very high, and I realize it's a very small percentage of the overall population. But if their behavior is being affected in some way, or they're finding any characteristics of this tool useful, I'd love to know what those are. Or turn off, same way. If there is any impediment, barrier for any of the non-users who are also atypical players or heavy gamblers, that's also a big insight that I'd like to learn. But I realize all the limitations on the current. I find fascinating this the next phase here of trying to link that player card overall data to ascertain some kind of behavioral change, because that's really where
It's probably
some of
worth
the
pointing out that I don't think anywhere, certainly in the United States, and that I'm aware of, any place in the world, but you would know whether that's accurate, has ever had the opportunity to link actual player
Well,
card data.
your work with
to-
BWIN did some of
online.
that, right?
Yeah, but in the bricks and mortar casino world, has there ever been an opportunity before?
To
To
link
take- to-
play management data with
With
gambling
real-
and cash
yeah,
activity
with
data?
real player
Nothing
card.
that's public.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure operators, licensees have a pretty good idea. But I mean, that's just a measure of what an unusual research project this is, that this has never been available before. I'm reminded, and I think you sort of alluded to this earlier in some of our discussions, Deb, that it's time as this evolves, we can begin to think a little more clearly about what we're trying to get out of this. What is a net good? When we went into this, for example, early on, it was easy to say, well, what people would you like enrolled? Well, the experience of enrollment was so abysmal that we had no idea other than more than in the past. We couldn't be very precise about what we would consider good. But I think as we're beginning to see some of how this plays out, in the long run, the question is, does this accomplish our broad-based objectives? And what does it take? What metric, you know, how many people affected in a positive way is enough to net a positive? And I think we're working our way towards being able to articulate those kinds of objectives more clearly.
The survey research that's referenced in the final bullet point here, is that part of the research agenda going forward?
Yeah, it's in the research plan for this fiscal year. So ideally, it will be in a report that will come to us later, probably at the end of the fiscal year.
Excellent.
In addition to a report that includes the linked player data. The data issues that Debbie and team have been talking about, collecting the data was quite complicated, but we have made significant strides in being able to create that data set that links the ACSC player directly with the Play My Way player card data. And I believe that Matt is especially happy about that.
Go ahead.
Debbie and everybody, I've heard Dr. Schaefer talk about in the past, in the context of a lot of other things, the notion of towards in these kinds of activities, making sure there's no harm. That first there is no turnoff. There's maybe people affecting their behavior in a negative way. Do you see any? Can you say anything to that effect based on this research?
I think as far as the data that we have available right now and the analyses that we did, we didn't observe anything that we would categorize as harm at this point. Certainly someone else could look at it in a different way and come to a different conclusion, but from the analyses that we did right now, we didn't come to that conclusion.
And I think we have had to make a judgment, you know, for basically we've had to make a go, no-go decision on Play My Way at the other casinos without perfect data, with the research still open. But I think we looked at two potential kinds of harm. One is harm to healthy play, you know, not necessarily harm is a harsh word, but interference with healthy play. Is this program something that becomes an annoyance or a significant distraction or some other kind of a negative to people whose play is we would deem healthy play? And two is, does it screw up the operations of the casino, you know, by bringing the casino floor down or portions of the casino floor or whatever? And I think as best we've been able to look at that and getting what I'm sure is pretty honest feedback from Plainridge, we have not had those two issues. I mean, we certainly in the early days, we had some bugs in the system. But I think their characterization now to the outside world, if I'm not mistaken, is that the imposition on the operations of the casino floor is in the nature of zero, although there still are occasional problems in the Play My Way program, A. And B, I think the people on the floor and the management at Plainridge do not have any sense of negative feedback from their players, you know, from people who are not interested in Play My Way is saying Play My Way is a pain and it's an annoyance and I'm going to go somewhere else. We haven't picked up anything like that, I don't think, have we? Yeah. So as best we're able to tell, those two kinds of harm have not been evidenced, which I think is why other of our licensees are beginning to think about they might want to do something similar.
Let me clarify, though, just quickly. There are individuals that have unenrolled, and they unenrolled because that I've heard that they didn't like receiving the notifications. They were an annoyance. But the key factor there is it's a voluntary system. If you don't find the notifications helpful or you don't find the tracking tool helpful, you have that option to unenroll. But has it interfered once they unenroll, and overall, I would say no.
And apparently it's very easy to unenroll. You have a large number of people unenrolling within the hour.
Within the minute.
Or within the minute.
Yes, it is very easy, and it was one key feature that was very important was the ability to unenroll from the electronic gaming machine.
Just like it's easier to also to continue getting notifications. It's just clicking another, would you like to continue, and it's yes or no.
Were you going to say something?
I was going to say that once we're able to actually do the survey, we'll be able to look at other aspects of harm that might be interesting. So just as one example, we could ask people whether or not having the ability to check their actual spend over time, did that ever, stimulate you to gamble when otherwise you might not have? And we can find out whether or not it provokes things that maybe you don't want it to provoke, spending beyond what people had planned and things like that. But that's going to take, something like that is going to take actually talking to them, through a survey and asking them about their subjective experiences and opinions about the system.
How do we market Play My Way Mark now to new cardholders?
Well, Play My Way is still. Play My Way is still talked about, and it's a central tool of the GameSense program. So it is certainly marketed that way. There continues to be signage through the property, as far as I know, and any new player that the first time they put their card into the machine, an invitation to enroll in Play My Way pops up. And in addition, if a person says, no, I don't want to enroll in Play My Way, take me to the game, it's simply pushing a button. But that same invitation will pop up 30 days later.
And 30 days later, and 30 days later, and 30 days later. Yeah. Well, two thoughts. One is, might just be worth making a note, when we're somewhere, is there more that we could do when enrollments are modest? At the beginning, when you're getting hundreds and thousands to enroll, there's not much you can do in the retail hand-holding marketing of this. But when you're in a steady state operation and just having incremental growth, there might be more we could do to market this to people than what we're doing now.
Right.
So just make a note of that somewhere, and we ought to think about that.
Yeah. I agree. There will be points where we want to reinvigorate the program, much like any of the responsible gaming or GameSense tools or initiatives that we have. This survey through January 31st represents 8,856 Play My Way users. Since that time, through the end of September, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but we're well over 15,000 people that have ever enrolled in Play My Way, and we're at well over 12,000 people that are currently enrolled in Play My Way. The program continues to grow. The data set that we can use for our evaluation continues to grow, and so I'm personally very excited about the program, but also about the evaluation efforts as we move forward.
Well, in addition to marketing efforts, I think, the GameSense advisors are great conduit for that effort. Great. But if we learn along the way, which, some of the questions that we're posing, is the number of notifications a bit of a barrier, or just right, or the other way? I think those things could help a long way towards,
Right. The other thing that, in terms of harm, quote harm, I would think that maybe over a period of time, a regular player would get annoyed at every month having to say, no, I don't want to play, and I would think we'd hear that just anecdotally, if not otherwise. But it'll be interesting to see when we talk to people, is there a point at which we would want to turn the system off, If you've said no for 6 months in a row, should we turn it off for a year or something like that?
Or give them the option not to receive any further notifications, like mini unsubscribe features when you're on the internet.
Never ask me about this again.
Right.
A little check mark.
There's many.
LaPlante off my case.
It's going to vary by the person. I was annoyed yesterday by my car, which gives me an alert whenever it hits 37 degrees because it might be cold out. And it did it twice, and I was trying to figure out how to keep it from happening again.
Same here.
Because
If
it
you
was hovering around
if
37.
you figure out how to turn that off, would you please come to my house? Okay, anything else? Thank you very much. This is great.
Thank you.
I know this is really a lot of work, and we really appreciate it. And this is
Very, very
really
impressive.
really powerful stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Done? Okay. We are on to item number 6, commissioner updates. Do we have anything of particular interest from any commissioners? You've been doing a lot of workforce development stuff, sessions and openings and so forth?
I'm trying to think of what we've been up to. Oh, yes, we were actually out at the opening of the MGM Career Center, which is now open and staffed by their HR and talent acquisition team. So they're in a readily accessible location, right adjacent to the property. People can go in, they can populate a Skill Smart account, they can talk with MGM HR and talent acquisition staff to learn more about individual jobs. It's open from 1 to 4 every weekday at this point. After the new year, those hours change and expand. So it was a great opening. The folks that they invited were a lot of their kind of community-based stakeholders to, again, help them get the word out as to what the opportunities mean, and encourage people to come in and get subscribed to the system.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can just report that I've attended the local mitigation, committee meetings for Region A, and yesterday out in Springfield and Region B. And one of the things that's striking by comparison to last year is that there is a sign that there's indication that the members of those committees are becoming considerably more engaged as they become knowledgeable about the fund and what the guidelines are, and what they are at liberty to suggest for purposes of changes. It's really been a considerably more engaged conversation than it was even a year ago. And
Great.
all of that, I think, is very, very
Yeah,
positive.
that's great.
Just to add to that, one of the tidbits of information we picked up yesterday was a report from the city of Springfield that most of that I-91 viaduct work is now all complete.
Great.
So they're reopening exits, and they obviously not completely completed the work, but the heavy kind of traffic realignment and temporary exit work is just about coming to an end, which is great.
Yeah.
I think
that's
it's
great.
only one, if I got this right, it's all but one either exit or entry has been reopened.
Great. And that, go ahead.
I remember when that date
Yeah.
was a big cause for discussion, and even the MGM opening, and
Right.
even the April.
I think if
Every
I were
day.
MassDOT, I'd be
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
strike this one
Yeah.
as a big win.
Yes.
They took some
It sure
grief.
is. They did it on time.
Yeah. It reminds me that the governor has appointed a new chair of the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee, which is the primary statutorily mandated advisory committee for us. And it's a woman, a name I can't remember, but she's a woman who runs the Merrimack Valley, Merrimack Valley Planning Association. And so we will be able, again, to start trying to convene. We also have got a number more appointments. So we've got the ability to get a quorum and a chair, so now we're going to get the GPAC going again, which is important.
That's great.
Anything else? Do we have a motion?
Well, move to adjourn?
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We are adjourned.